Welcome to the Smart Legacy Podcast, your resource for protecting assets and securing your future. Hosted by Stockton and Cant, join us as we cover essential estate planning and elder law topics, such as wills, trusts, and Medicaid planning. Stockton and Cant, your trusted attorney advisors in safeguarding what matters most. Welcome to another episode of the Smart Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Stockton, managing attorney of Stockton and Cant, an estate planning and elder law firm here in Kansas City with offices in both Overland Park and Gardner. In my work with families, I've seen something again and again. The families who plan thoughtfully leave behind more than assets. They leave behind clarity, direction, and peace of mind. Because estate planning is not just about passing along valuables. It's about passing along your values, your priorities, your intentions, and your care for the people you love. And sometimes caring for those people we love means helping them navigate decisions about care, safety, and quality of life as they age. This podcast is here to help you make thoughtful, informed decisions so your wishes are honored, your family is protected, and the people you love are guided by clarity instead of chaos. Today, we're talking about a topic many families face, but few feel fully prepared for: how to navigate senior care decisions for aging loved ones. I'm joined by David and Alix Thompson with Sage Senior Care Advisors. We've had the opportunity to work alongside them in supporting families facing care decisions, and I've come to appreciate their thoughtful, family-centered approach. They help families understand options, ask the right questions, and find care solutions that truly fit their loved ones' needs and values. David, Alix, glad you're here in studio with us today, so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So as here, tell a little bit, if you would, listeners, a little bit about you guys and what you do and how you started doing this or why you started doing it.
Sure.
Well, David and I have worked in long-term care and assisted living and David independent living for most of our careers. We both started in long-term care on a different path. David did some brain injury rehab early in his career and moved into marketing, and then pretty quickly into being an executive director and upper management. For myself, I started out as a CNA in my early 20s. I'm still a CNA. And I eventually became an activity director. I did that for most of 20 years. I've been an executive director for the past 16 years. And eventually with our last job, before we started Sage, moved into the corporate team. And I focused a lot on creating trainings for caregivers and families, especially around dementia. But at some point, right after COVID lockdown, stopped being such a thing, the investors for the company we worked for decided to sell the communities that were in Oklahoma, and you don't really need a corporate team for one community, So then David and I thought about moving forward doing similar work in the industry here in Kansas at home, But after we thought about it for a couple of weeks, we decided that just didn't feel very authentic to us. The communities we'd been managing were kind of our babies, and it just didn't seem right to do more of that. And we had a couple that we worked with in Oklahoma City who did senior placement and brought families into the communities we were managing, and they coached us, especially David. And David really championed our change. He really believed in Sage Senior Care Advisors, which I'll let him talk about that. But we decided that is what we were going to do, and here we are, 3.5 years later.
So a passion that you've been participating in this, working in this area for a long time.
Oh yeah. We love working with elders and their families and people in general. Working in long-term care or no matter what your job is in the industry, I think if you love people and care about people, then there's tons of work to be done. You always have somebody or something that you can focus on that's meaningful.
I tell people I grew up in the senior care industry or communities. My mom worked in that, and she said it was a labor of love, and she loved serving people. She had been a nurse, but over time, just being on the feet and everything, it took its toll, and she became activity director like you did, and she poured her whole heart and passion into making life as enjoyable for residents as she could, and she'd bring us kids in, and we would help out as well. Yeah. And as soon as I got to drive, I was driving ceramics from the this was the nursing homes of the 70s and 80s, very different than the world today.
Yeah.
That's right. So we move on a little bit. Tell me a little bit, what do you guys do through SAGE? What is it you do?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on that. So, and as Alex said, we've been managing senior living communities and memory care communities. And when we started this, our idea was we love helping families. So when we were touring people for our communities, and they were really in dire straits, having make difficult decisions for people with dementia to place them, we really just, our hearts would go out to them. And they always felt so appreciative that we could help educate them, guide them through the process, and get them settled into our community. So when we started this, that was kind of our passion. We wanted to be able to help people from the heart, whether they show up with all the resources in the world and have all the choices, or if they have Medicaid or Medicaid pending and they just need help finding a place, that we could actually get them the guidance that they might need. So when someone calls us, we really focus on understanding what is their circumstance. Let's hear their story. What's going on with their mom, their loved one, potentially a spouse, an elderly spouse. And many times they're in a crisis situation where they've had an injury, they've had an illness, they end up in the hospital and rehab, and now they can't go back home. So what we do is help them through the process of understanding what options are out there, helping to ask the right questions to see what care do they need, what kind of financial picture do they have, can they afford care, do they need extra resources, do they need to get plugged in with resources in the community, looking at their location, want to be close to family, and then helping them through that process to find placement when they need it.
There's so many options when it comes to placement now. I talked about with my mom, her job was to make life as pleasant as possible for the people that were there, but they didn't have a lot of options at that time. And it has changed so much over the years, where
it has.
So many options out there, so many great options that we go in. So that's neat. So with what you guys are doing, there's a lot of big national placement companies out there. What sets you guys apart? How are you guys different from them?
I think a big difference for us is we are boots on the ground here in Kansas City. We've been managing communities here and living in the community, so we are personal. We're going to meet face-to-face with the person. We're going to meet their loved one that needs the care, whether they're in the hospital or in the rehab or even at home. We're going to take them personally on tours through places that are a good match for them. I think the bigger national companies have a place in some form or fashion, but many of them, when you reach out to them, they kind of just blitz your name out to 10 or 15 places that might be a good match, and sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but they're not there personally with you, walking alongside you on that journey.
So many families, as you said, they don't contact you until they're in the crisis, right? They're in a crisis situation. Right. Maybe their loved one is been released from the hospital, it's becoming clear they're not coming home, they're in rehab, and we need to find a place. How do you go about guiding? And you've talked a little bit about this, but let's get in more details. Like, what does that look like? How are you guiding them through that process?
Well, we start out by getting to know them. As much as they'll show us, as much as they'll tell us about who they are, And, we need to know where do they live, or if it's not important to place them near where they live now, what is the location that we need to focus on? And understanding, say being outdoors is really important to somebody, but in a way maybe that's slightly different than another person. For example, things that they tell us may bring a certain environment that I'm already aware of to mind. Or it might eliminate another place, for example, because it has too much or not enough of something, that matters to them.
So we're trying to find, absolutely trying to find what's truly important to them. But you kind of alluded to is, because sometimes being close to family too, that's a decision, is it going to be convenient for the rest of the family to come in and visit? Is there a spouse who is going to be coming along? There's a separation.
Yeah.
Because families being involved, not every family can be involved. So I'm not trying to cast any kind of judgment on a situation, but for families that can be involved with their loved one on whatever basis they can be, they are the most important relationship and the most important kind of governor for the way the situation is going to go. Through them being involved. So for the families that, want to be nearby and want to be able to visit on a regular basis, then it seems like it's pretty important to find them opportunities when we can, that are right in their neck of the woods.
And I think there's a lot of nuances that are different from person to person, and all assisted livings or long-term care places are not created equal. So we're really trying to drill down on the front end to really understand medically, physically, what is their situation? Because do they have, I'm working with a person right now who has a feeding tube, so that's going to limit where we can look. Somebody else who has diabetic injections, that may be a good fit for some assisted livings, but not another. So really drilling down to understand what is their care need specifically, and then get into preferences and likes and what is their passion or what do they enjoy doing, and then try to find the community that fits all of those pieces of the puzzle.
Does there have to be a certain medical care need or care level before you guys come in, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, not at all. In fact, maybe we'll get into this later, but I think planning ahead for someone before there's that urgent need is really important. So let's say you have aging parents at home. You're starting to see some signs of things changing. Maybe mom's had a fall, or just things aren't exactly the way they should be, and you're kind of wondering, do they need a little extra help, or maybe they do need a little extra help at the home. Is getting to that point where let's go out and take a look and see what's out there. Make a plan ahead of time. Find out what's available and what they provide, so that now you're prepared and you're not going to be reeling when you're in a crisis situation if you come into that situation.
Yeah, and I think it's really so human. Folks are always trying to find the right timing. When is the right timing? But actually, to have a good plan, the right time can be right now. And if something shifts later, then we can adjust and make a new plan. But I think for me anyway, it feels so much more secure. And for many of the families that we work with, when they are willing to look ahead and aren't just responding through crisis, to be able to see what options are available now, so that it's not something that's kind of looming or hanging over their head. Where they have these fears of where they may end up. I think it changes a lot for them when they do plan ahead.
It's one of those, we tell them when we're doing estate planning for clients all the time, on the planning for, I hope you never need long-term care, but if you do, the best plan is one that we've planned out early and hope we never need it. But so many people don't plan early, and so we're dealing with them. They are in that crisis situation. I'm sure it's the same for you guys, that they didn't plan early, but if they can get you early, that's what we do. So about how pay, there's confusion out there, like, well, Medicare is going to pay this, or you've got to qualify for Medicaid to do that, or I need to private pay for that. So how does all of that factor in to your guys' role and you're helping families navigate through their choices?
Well, I feel like that's a loaded question, but it really depends on the situation. And yeah, you're right. so many people don't understand the difference between Medicare and Medicaid and all of the different rules that go along with it. Medicaid pending is something that people don't understand quite often, that, when people are Medicaid pending and they have to find placement, your choices are quite limited because, when somebody's pending for Medicaid, they're not yet approved. So that doesn't guarantee a placement that they will actually be able to be paid. So there are so many different facets of what goes into long-term care for different people based on their situation and their finances that I think it would be a little difficult to summarize.
Yeah, and I think also, looking at the whole picture, so they may have enough resources initially to afford assisted living for a period of time, but when they're in a situation where they need to spend down to Medicaid, for example, let's say they have enough resources for a year or year and a half or two, that gives you a little more choice in the matter, because some places will take a private pay situation for placement, and then as long as you can pay their fee for a year or 2 years or sometimes 3 years, then you can stay there with Medicaid. Other situations are where, let's say you have 6 months worth of private pay, and now you're in a situation where, like, okay, I can afford this place, but then I'm going to have to move again in 6 months. It doesn't make any sense. So we want to make sure we're narrowing down choices to make sure they're not getting themselves into a bad situation and have to hop from facility to facility.
Yeah, I mean, that can be so tough. You're just getting settled in, getting comfortable with your care providers and the people around you and your new normal, and then, we got to move again.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are often working with the adult children of people needing care. What are some things you wish every adult child who is in that situation, what are a few things you wish they knew in advance or that you would like to tell them here today?
I think what comes to mind for me is that it's a complicated situation out there for care, whether that's in-home care, facility-based care, all the different levels of care. And, there are good people out there that can help sort that out. And I think that if they can take time to plan a little bit ahead of time with parents, even when they don't need to better understand it, they're going to feel so much more empowered to go forward. And I know we've talked about this already, but I think it's an important point that they will feel like they're prepared and have resources and be ready to go when there's a need, I think. And I think that all communities are not created equal. So you on the surface may have a wonderful community, it looks vibrant and all of that, but maybe having some difficulties kind of behind the scenes with management changes or turnover in staff. And we're trying to keep our finger on the pulse of those things too. So really, having an opportunity to see what's out there ahead of time and get a feel is a good plan.
So you've brought up home care several times here, people getting care at home. So they can, some people will get care at home, some it's in assisted living, some may be in independent living, getting care there, or skilled nursing. When is the time that you guys come in, and which of those can you help them navigate? Home care, assisted living, skilled nursing care?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we really try to be a one-stop shop, if you will, even though that wasn't, we didn't pick those words. But we really like connecting people with other companies, services, individuals that we either have worked with in the past on the facility side, or have hired, to work with our own parents, or people that maybe we haven't hired, but we've chatted with, and we really like their philosophy for care. Because just like in other industries, it stands out when people are heart-centered, or when you can relate to what's most important to them. So when we work with people, and I think in part since we have worked in long-term care for so long, it helps us to see the big picture. So many times when people come to us, they have their primary issue, their primary concern, which tends to be placing their loved one. But as we get to know them and their situation, it becomes obvious, maybe they need a mover. somebody who specializes in moving people from different senior environments or from home into a senior environment. Maybe they need somebody to help them pack. Maybe they need an elder care attorney. A lot of times folks don't realize that division of assets is something that not only do they need, but is available to them, and they need people to explain it to them how to make it happen, and how one person can be in long-term care and be being provided for with the funds that are allocated for them, and the other person can still be in their home, and elder care attorneys are really important for that. So we appreciate being able to refer people for those kind of services. And there's so many other things that come up all the time. There are so many different layers to the long-term care industry and things that people really need to know. Like overnight briefs. That there are special briefs that a person can wear that are specially designed to wick a large amount of liquid away from their body. A lot of people don't realize that, but actually that can be a hot point for elders who feel embarrassed and or don't want to have to worry about getting to the bathroom. Not that they don't want to keep going to the bathroom while they can. They do, but some people get afraid and nervous that they might have an accident, and so it's good to know about different products and things, and those are all things that we have a lot of knowledge about, and we love to share information about those things with other people.
Yeah, I would just add that we take a real holistic approach. We need to look at their whole situation, and the more we talk to them and pull out from them, we can be problem solvers. That's really what we do, is we're problem solvers, and it's not just finding senior placement. So an elder law attorney such as yourself, it's very common that people have that need for different reasons, but they don't always know what the solution is or that they even need one. So we can guide them that. Or home care, I brought that up as you mentioned, but sometimes they're just trying to hang on at home for a while, even though we're out touring places. We're just going to hook them up with the right people so they can get that support at home until they're ready to go.
As I kind of said at the in the intro, we've had the opportunity through our law firm to work alongside you guys, helping families, and because we don't do what you do, we need you to help those families that come in. And I think, as you've been saying, families, if they reach out, and the earlier they reach out, the better. Know your options that go in. Yeah. And when you were talking about some of the things like, even to help educate the families to look for those signs that are withdrawing. They don't want to go out. Maybe they're embarrassed or the things in, and be able to give them that comfort that you don't have to be embarrassed, that we can go in and you guys can really steer them to resources, to things they weren't aware of, didn't know about.
Sure.
So anyhow, you were going to say something.
Oh, well, I was going to say the question that you asked about, like what we wish people know. One thing that I wish people knew is that it is a vulnerable situation. Of course it is. But a lot of times I think families are so concerned and afraid that if they have their loved one in a long-term care environment, that that they may have to worry about concerns that they share with the management of the facility or caregivers there, or that they themselves will lose their rights along with their loved one losing their autonomy. And I wish that families understood that that really they play a very important role. And if they're a power of attorney or a durable power of attorney, in many ways they are in charge, almost equally to the staff that is there in the long-term care community. And every family's different. So some people will be involved at a different level, but I would just want for families to know that, having the intention of creating a healthy partnership with the team that they're going to work with will be, the best thing to create the situation that they're hoping for their loved one.
So that's great. Here's a question for you. What are some early warning signs that a family should start exploring care options? So what would those early warning signs be that they might want to start exploring those care options?
Well, I mean, I guess it really depends. There's not just one answer. So like my folks, for example, they live in Independence. They live on their own. They are in their 80s. I don't think they'll mind me me talking about them. And we talk to them on a regular basis about this exact thing. You know, hey, you guys, we really should go out and look at some of these assisted living communities, some of the independent living communities, the ones that have a continuum of care, because we don't know where things are going to be 2 years from now. I mean, we don't know what they're going to be next week either. I get that. But because my parents have a bunch of different things going on with them physically. They have different disease processes and they're aging differently than each other even. And so it does kind of create an unknown. So I think if things come up, so first of all, the first answer is if you're aging and you don't have a plan, if you have disease processes or a loved one has disease processes going on and you don't have a plan and know what the next step is, then it's a good time for you to start looking into it and begin understanding the difference between assisted living and independent living and what's meant by skilled nursing. You know, because long-term care is an umbrella, really, that encapsulates all of that. But when people say long-term care, oftentimes they mean skilled care or a nursing home, right? Other things, though, are, you know, maybe somebody has a dementia diagnosis or some type of cognitive impairment, and they're doing fine right now living on their own. But we all know, depending on the type of dementia, depending on the cognitive impairment, that is going to continue forward. There will be further decline can be anticipated, you know. So when that happens, it's a great time to start seeing what options are available. Not everybody with a cognitive impairment is going to need memory care, but some people are. And there are a lot of different types of memory care communities and environments too, like the residential care homes, for example. A lot of people aren't familiar with them at all. And then, you know, if somebody's spouse has just passed, or if somebody's anticipating their spouse passing, and, you know, I feel like that comes up a lot where, you know, married couples compensate for one another an awful lot. I just was talking earlier about David. We drink this Alka-Geyser green juice every morning, and most mornings he makes it. Andy feeds the dogs and the cat. And I really notice on days where he takes off before I do, and now I am feeding the dogs and the cat, and I'm making my own Alka-Geyser, that he really makes a big difference in that way, right? And so married couples who've been together for however long they have been, they compensate for one another in big and small ways. And when there's a shift in their relationship and one person isn't there anymore, or they can't do the same things anymore, they really notice the difference. What would you say?
Yeah, no, I might add to that. Excuse me, is when someone when you're starting to notice health changes in your parents, for example, as an adult child, you might notice maybe someone had a fall, or they're having some memory issues, or just subtle changes. That can be an early sign to start. Maybe we need to start thinking about this, or if they need a little bit of extra help. I think to some degree, like Alex said, when one spouse is caring for the other, it kind of sets you up for a situation where if something happens to the able-bodied spouse, or they have a downturn, or they get the flu or sick, now you're in a situation where the other spouse is probably going to need more help from somebody else. So again, some of these situations where if you have one spouse that's healthy and one that's not, that's a probably early sign to start thinking about what do we do for home care as a backup, or what do we do if we need to move in a different direction.
You know, what seems to happen a lot as families, the kids, they're starting to see this, but then guilt starts to come in. They feel, one, it's a tough conversation to have with mom or dad for many people, is to, you know, let's explore options. But how do you help families who are feeling guilty about even exploring, let alone moving their parent or loved one out of the home?
Well, that can be really rough, but but we just try to empower them. I mean, and also to speak directly and with kindness and based in reality, which is, you know, we all have to deal with these things unless, of course, something happens and we're the ones who scoot out first, and then we don't have to. But all of these issues that come up around late life and end of life care affect all of us. We all need funeral planning. We all need people to rely on around that who know the ins. We don't know the ins and outs of that, but we know people who do, and we've heard really great things about them too. And I think that that's really important. You know, like they're seeing people who help in senior placement. They aren't all people who have worked in long-term care. They all have different understandings of that, but they do seem to have, like all of the local senior placement people seem to have a desire to help people and be present for them and give them somebody to lean into who, even if they don't know all of the ins and outs and every answer to everything, you know, like we're willing to help. And to figure it out and to know enough professionals and people who are really good at all of the different things that are needed, that we, you know, can feel confident that we'll be able to connect them, you know, with somebody who will help.
I think too, just to add to that, and that's all true, is people need reassurance. They're not sure they're doing the right thing. They feel guilty. They probably have known for a long time they need to place their loved one in a community that can support them better physically or in whatever way they need cognitively. And I think part of our job, and we face this all the time, especially with spouses. Adult children still feel guilty, but it's usually the spouse that has the most guilt. They promise to stay with this person till death do us part. Their job, you know, typically the wife is always the caregiver, and they don't want to give up that role, and they feel tremendous guilt. And I think for us, it's just a slow process. This is not a quick fix to guilt. It's just continue to reassure them over and over again that this is needed and why, and this is the right place, and how you might have a new relationship with your spouse where someone else is caring for them and you're not the caregiver anymore. So it's a process, and many people face that.
You know, it's a process, but I think one of the things that you guys bring for families that are facing this, there's a lot going on, right? This is just one often of many things that they've got to deal with, and it can be a big burden to kind of get through this. So you guys are able to come in as a resource because the kids, they're not familiar with any of the communities out there. They don't have the ability to really know which is the best one for mom or dad, or, you know, as you said, you know, you try to figure out what are they looking for, what do they like to do. So you guys have that ability to kind of steer them and say, hey, look, here's a list of ones we may want to look at, kind of limit the list a little bit, get them steered in the right direction. People are probably wondering, like, well, okay, great, you know, but if I'm going to have you do that, how do you guys charge or get paid, and how does that work, factor into all this?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think different companies do it differently. Our model is whoever shows up in front of us, we're going to do our best to help them. And primarily, if we're placing someone in independent living, assisted living, memory care, and even sometimes long-term care, if they're in a situation where they can pay privately for that service, 9 out of 10 times the communities, we've been doing this for almost 4 years, have a referral agreement with us to pay us a referral commission or referral fee. And so there's no charge to a family. Oftentimes someone comes to us with Medicaid, or they're spending down to Medicaid with very little left. If someone's on Medicaid, we cannot accept a referral fee, and nor can they pay it. So we're in a situation where we'll do our best to help them narrow down that field over the phone with them. We'll do the same intake that we do. We spend the same amount of time. We'll identify which places potentially have an open bed for them that would take Medicaid, give them a list, and we can either turn them loose and let them go and look on their own, or we offer to go with them, set up the tours, go with them, and then we charge an hourly rate in that situation. So it's a variety. So we don't want to just take people to places that we get a referral fee from. We want to find the best match no matter what their circumstance is, and then we'll work it out in the end.
You know, and I think it comes in because a lot of people, like, you know,
is this going to be expensive if it's in here? And because it's a very competitive environment out there. They built these communities on every other corner, it seems like. And so they're vying to get people in the door. Yeah. So they will often then compensate. They pay that fee that brought them in as coming in. So I think that can be helpful, that they don't have to come out necessarily with money out of their pocket.
Correct.
And if we're going to have Medicaid, that we can incorporate that in and work that as part of a Medicaid spend down strategy or whatever works for them. So it doesn't really have to cost them extra money in the end, which I think a lot of people, they're very concerned about cost. The whole cost of care, how they're going to find care. It's
very expensive.
And so you guys are able to show them that this does not, you're still going to pay for care. We can't escape that part. But if we do good planning, we find the right community, we've thought through what resources you have, how we're going to do it. You guys are in that position to refer back to the attorneys, and we look to refer to people like you that, hey, we need people who need to find care. So when we treat this as a team sport and we work at this together to really help families navigate and get the care they need for their loved ones, and they don't have to be overly concerned about fees or cost of getting the help, because often it will pay for itself. It's been money well spent. All right. Before I kind of wrap up, any last one thing that any of the questions I've asked or a question you wish I would have asked that we haven't talked about here today?
Well, I think it's kind of important to talk a little bit about, even though it's not a philosophical conversation, but just a lot of times people don't understand the difference between assisted living communities and like a skilled care environment. They think that they're the same, and really they're not. Really, assisted livings aren't even the same as one another, because assisted living communities, while they're regulated in a similar way to the way a skilled nursing facility would be or a nursing home, actually part of the regulations is that they have to follow their own policies. And so if you're not familiar with the assisted living communities and don't know, then you may not know that this assisted living community will allow people to age in place, which means that whatever level of care they move in needing, as their care needs change and they may have physical or cognitive decline, they'll be able to stay there. They'll just raise their level of care, and care levels vary from one place to another. And they can stay. They can have hospice services there. A lot of those places bring in dentists, podiatrists, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, to make it easier so that people don't have to go out in the community to receive those services that we need more as we age. But some assisted living communities don't do that. Some assisted living communities say, if you cannot identify that is the exit sign and you cannot remove yourself from the building in the case of an emergency, then it wouldn't be appropriate for you to live here. And so that's one way that we can really help families, is because we do know the communities, and we make a point to know the communities and encourage them to tell us, like, what are the great things that you're doing, and reach out so that we are more in touch about that. But in that way, we can really personalize the search and help people, figure out what's most appropriate for them. And likewise, sometimes people, maybe they do want assisted living and to be able to age in place, but they're not feeling so secure about, what if something happens and they end up in the hospital and they do need skilled care? Well, are there places that can do everything? Yes, there are. And there are places that can do everything. And so we really do like being able to educate families, the ones who want us to and are open to it, because obviously nobody always wants mom speak. But that said, we want to be a resource to people. So even if we're not working with them for placement, sometimes we do care navigation, which is our umbrella term for everything that isn't placement that people need help with. And we have an hourly fee for that. But also we'll just talk to people, like if they want to call and talk through something. People who are taking care of a loved one at home, they need resources and connection too, and connection. And it's pretty fun helping them figure out, especially when it's like dementia or behaviors, it's pretty fun helping them figure out small things that they can do to make their everyday life easier sometimes while they're trying to patch it together and stay home for as long as possible.
You know, that was bringing you guys on to the podcast to get this out to our listeners, because I want this podcast to be a resource for our viewers and listeners and be able to give them relevant, useful information that they can use in their lives. And so to know that there are resources like you guys and Sage out there that they can reach out to, that they don't have to to navigate this alone, that you guys are able to help them, and it doesn't have to be overly expensive or scary. They can just reach out and help. We'll make sure we put in the show call notes how to get a hold of you guys on that. So guys, thank you for being here today. It went by fast, but as we're wrapping up here, so thank you for being in, and we'll have to do this again in the future.
Thank you, Glenn.
So
Thank
as
you.
we wrap up, remember, estate planning is not just about paperwork. It's about protecting the people you love and making life easier for them when it matters most. Thoughtful planning today can spare your family confusion, conflict, and unnecessary burden tomorrow. Your estate plan, or lack of one, will one day speak for you when you no longer can. It helps determine whether the people that you love are protected or burdened, whether grief is softened by clarity or made harder by chaos and confusion. What is left undone today often becomes what families must deal with later. And when the time comes, there is no opportunity to go back and fix it. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, that's a good thing. These are important conversations to have, and they're worth sharing. Thank you for spending this time with us on the Smart Legacy Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and share it with someone you care about. These topics matter, and sharing them helps more families plan well. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also visit us at stocktonlaw.com, where you'll find all of our episodes and many other helpful resources. Until next time, plan thoughtfully and take care of the people you love. And David and Alix, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. Laws vary by state, and this podcast focuses on estate planning and elder law in Kansas and Missouri. If you are located in Kansas or Missouri and require legal advice, please contact our office. Otherwise, consult a qualified attorney licensed in your jurisdiction.